Well, Lane said it. This is the number one SEC team against the number one Pac-12 team, and that description is perfect. No notes.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's show, we'll discuss why the Ole Miss versus Washington State game is big with Christian Rao from the Pac-12 Daily to learn all about the Cougars and what has caused this Jekyll and Hyde thing that the Washington State Cougars are doing this year. How is Jimmy Rogers planning to stop the Ole Miss Rebels? We'll look at that and paths to victory and give our score predictions for the game as well. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download that app today. So really fired up about what could happen. I'm ready to see exactly what Christian has to say about Washington State. Hey, this is potentially the best passing team that Ole Miss has played this year. They have some issues on other parts that Ole Miss look to exploit, but we'll see exactly how that goes. But Christian, what has caused this Jekyll and Hyde thing that Washington State has done this season?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on. And I'd have to say it's the initial change of the head coach, with multiple head coaches moving and going to different places across the country over multiple years with Washington State. They finally bring in who they hope can be their program builder in Jimmy Rogers, coming over from the FCS level out of the Dakotas. And he's trying to build this culture. He's trying to build up this type of new resume with Washington State. And it was a slow start. You get a field goal win against an FCS opponent in Idaho, and then just a complete disaster against North Texas, losing 59-10. A quarterback change was made in that second half, and they haven't looked back since. And since then, it's been a completely different team with Zevi Eckhouse leading the charge there. I think Jimmy Rogers, he's an intense dude, by the way. I think you're going to notice this. Ole Miss fans probably going to love this guy when they hear him kind of talk, but overall, I think you're going to see a different type of Washington State team, one that you can't compare from the first few weeks of the football season.
Yeah, what happened in the Washington game? Because they were able to score the ball. They scored over 30 points in that game. But defensively, they were outmatched at certain positions. Is it just a situation that the athletes of Washington were kind of above what the athletes of Washington State was in that game?
I think eventually, yes. Yeah, I think eventually that's where you got to. Jimmy Rogers brought over 70 plus transfers, most of them coming from the FCS level to Washington State this year, following him over. So I think there was eventually that pass up war came to talent. But look, the first three quarters, Washington State went blow to blow with the Huskies in that one, and that was huge, especially after the 59-10 disaster with North Texas and Denton. So I think that there was a lot of good to come from that. But of course, it just kind of ran away from them in the fourth quarter. Washington wound up being the better team.
Yeah, the big thing that Ole Miss is dealing with in this game is this is the consummate trap game. Ole Miss has Georgia next week. You have a home game against Washington State that you're a 33.5-point favorite against. You just beat LSU, a top 5 team. This is the perfect trap game. And I would say this, and I will be honest about this. If this game was in Pullman, Ole Miss would be an upset alert. This game being in Oxford, Ole Miss is probably going to win this game by 3 or 4 scores, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree I think Ole Miss wins this game. I'm a little shaky on if they cover or if they not, though, because I do think this game's a little bit closer because the trends, I think, are putting in that perspective at the first couple games of the season for Washington State, not really putting a lot of weight in what they've seen over the last few weeks. Just for example, the last week against Colorado State, they only won 20-3, but they had multiple drops in the end zone that should have made that game about 41-3. So Washington State, their offense with Eckhouse in charge, can put up a lot of points. So that's why I'm a little worried about maybe a potential backdoor cover for Washington State if you're the betting folks. But overall, yeah, I think Ole Miss finds a way to win this game. game. Washington State, they're about to start this crazy East Coast trip with the fact of only having 2 teams inside the Pac-12 this year. They've had to find a crazy amount of ways to schedule inside their 12 games for the season, and a lot of that has to do with traveling, and this one in Oxford is no different.
You know, it's funny because Zevi Eckhouse is the guy that's played quarterback the last couple of games. He was originally the number 3 quarterback. The starter was Jackson Potter, who got benched in the North Texas game because they had a disaster first half in that game. Anybody that's listening to this, was 5 turnovers. It was an absolute disaster. North Texas was up 42-3 in the first half or something like that. What does Eckhouse bring this that allowed him to jump over the number 2 quarterback? Tell me a little bit about Zevi Eckhouse.
Yeah, experience is definitely the number one word I'd use if I'm describing Zevi Eckhouse. And that might not sound like something that you're thinking about when you're saying, well, he's the 3rd string quarterback. He's the one that started the DirecTV Holiday Bowl last year for Washington State. He got that, and he did very well in that game as well. But coming over from Bryant, had a lot of experience at that level as well. And he just brings a different kind of confidence to that offense, something that they most definitely needed when they're trying to rebuild. And as we mentioned earlier, kind of lift that talent up from all those FCS transfers heading into the Pac-12. I like his confidence. I think he's very good in composure. He's very smart on the field. Whether we see him in one of those UFL or CFL leagues next year wouldn't surprise me, but I think he definitely has a future as an analyst as well, because he's a very smart football guy, and that shows on the field.
Yeah, as good as their passing game is, their running game is pretty bad right now. If you look at the fact they've ran for a total of about 500 yards this year, that's less than 100 yards per game, I think. And if you take away 5 explosive runs, just take away 5 explosive runs, 20% of their rushing yards disappear. What's going on with them running the football? Does Ole Miss can Ole Miss get away with rushing 3 just like they did against LSU on the weekend? Is it Washington State going to stick to the running game? And who are the players that we need to keep an eye on?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest concern for Washington State for the rest of the year, not just for this game against Ole Miss, but the rest of the year if they want to try and get themselves bowl eligible, maybe even up to about like an 8-4 record is where I think their ceiling could be. And it's definitely the run game, because they have not found a way to take that over. I don't think that's a talent issue, like rising up to the levels like we've been mentioning earlier in this segment. I think there's some really good running backs on this team. Angel Johnson, very good. You have Voorhees, is like kind of like a dynamic all-around type of player. There's just a lot of really good running backs in the roster. Personally, I believe that, but they just haven't found a way to step that up. They started to get a little bit of traction this last game against Colorado State, but Colorado State doesn't really have that kind of resume where you're like, well, that's makes you have the warm and fuzzies moving forward because of the rush defense. Looking at what you saw last week against LSU, I know that they didn't get a lot of rushing yards in this one as well. I think you can probably slow them down with only 3, force them to be one-dimensional with the pass. And if that's the case, Zevi Eckhouse, although he does have this confidence and experience I mentioned, he's bound to make mistakes if it's against an Ole Miss defense who's expecting him to throw the football.
And the crazy thing is, because everybody thinks about Washington State as like being in the Pac-12, and they think of the old Pac-12, what the Pac-12 was. This will be about double the largest capacity that Washington State has played in this year. And that's weird to think about, but everything's been about 30,000, very G5 kind of Colorado State, all of that stuff. Is there a chance that they just kind of get to Oxford, Mississippi and freak out a little bit?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, again, going back to what we've kind of addressed earlier, these are 70+ players coming over from the FCS level. So not only are you adding in the top attendance for Washington State, where they've had really good attendance in Pullman this year, it's just nowhere near the size of what you get in Oxford and down in SEC country. Wouldn't shock me if that was one of the things that happens right off the bat. This could be a game that could be over fast, or maybe they surprise you and they stick around for a little while.
All right, when we come back, we will talk to Christian about some players that we need to keep an eye on for the Washington State Cougars, and a little bit later on, we'll talk about paths to victory and predictions. So stick around for that. Listen, when the opening whistle blows on a new repair, your crew moving forward is important with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from most of the trusted brands in all of the business. Their real-time industry inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Hey, that's a football reference. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The Part Finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Their Trademaster perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process smoother. Join the free Trademaster program today and score some serious perks like priority shipping and lower prices and dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. And the NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I personally love how FanDuel gives me so many different ways to play. I can build parlays or player props, or I can even do the live lines features during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little bit of something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Do us a favor and like and subscribe and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcatcher you're listening to this on. Give it a 5-star review as well. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps everything free. And if you want more, join the Insiders program and the Subtech link down below. No trolls, 14-day free trial, and the easiest way ever to cancel. So give that a try, and don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Nearly every team, college or pro, is ready for you. So one thing that's interesting, Christian, looking at what's going on, Ole Miss has players that they're completely unfamiliar with this. This, as Lane Kiffin says, this is the number one SEC team, the number one Pac-12 team, and it's a cross-country classic, yada, yada, yada. He was being funny with that, but he is true that there are players that you just don't know. Now, Ole Miss has transfers from Washington State or having a history there in Kapina Gushigan, and also Deshaun Stribling is in Oxford, Mississippi at the moment. But who are the players now? You mentioned the roster turnover was massive in the offseason with Jimmy Rogers coming over from South Dakota State, where he built a Jackrabbits dynasty in the Dakotas. Who are some of the players that Ole Miss fans need to keep an eye on?
Well, Zevi Eckhouse is the easiest one to bring up just because he leads that entire offense. He loves throwing the deep post. He's not afraid to say that. Every kind of interview you hear from him, people keep talking about what's his favorite route, and he says the post. So if your safeties do a good job at stopping that, I think you can do a really good job at stopping Zevi Eckhouse. And that's something that I do assume that Ole Miss can do. Some of his wide receivers are very impressive. They have had some issues with holding on to the football in some capacity, though. But I think Meredith, the wide receiver for Washington State, is very good. I really like what they have. Joshua Meredith, I should give you his full name. Excuse me on that. He's played some really good football. Carter Pabst is a guy that doesn't really get a lot of the stats as of late, but what I've seen from him show flashes, and we've seen him step up at certain aspects. So definitely like what I see from him. And a guy that had a crazy route to get to Washington State, went through JUCO, went through other things, and that's Devin Ellison, another wide receiver. Hasn't got a lot of snaps so far this season, but's only played just the last 2 games. He could make an impact at wide receiver against Ole Miss. Zevi Eckhouse and the wide receivers are going to be really the only way that they can stick around in this game against Ole Miss. If they do give you a couple surprises, then it'll be one of those good games, in my opinion.
Talk about the offensive line real quick before we move over to the defensive side of the ball. I noticed that you haven't mentioned the offensive line once. Now, if you look at the stats, they seem to pass block pretty well. But if you look at their rushing stats, they don't seem to run block very well. Is this offensive line just a patchwork thing? They're just a Band-Aid to try to get to next season?
Yeah, I think so. Brock Diu, their center, is really good, and I think he is the cornerstone, like the one that really holds down this offensive line. But you nailed it right there. They're pretty good at the pass blocking. They do a pretty good job at defending the pass rush. We'll see how that is against an SEC team. They haven't seen a team like a trenches like an SEC team like Ole Miss, but they've really struggled when it comes to blocking against the run. It's not just the talent that's, in my opinion, there in the backfield. I think there's some issues when it comes to the offensive line. So could cause some issues for Washington State here. I think Ole Miss could have an absolute heyday in the backfield with stopping the running backs and because of this offensive line. If they do, though, I think it'll be coming off the edge. I think your edge rushers could have a really big day.
Yeah, if you want to look at edge rushers, that is where probably, in my opinion, the biggest advantage that Ole Miss has in this game, the people on the outside coming off the edge, but also whenever Ole Miss is on offense, I think the edge players are a little bit of weakness, especially in the run game for Washington State. You saw Jonah Coleman kind of counter out the gate multiple times in that Apple Cup earlier this season. And with Kewan Lacey being one of the leaders in the country in forcing missed tackles, going up against a defense that is not tackled particularly well, this kind of feels like a match made in heaven, does it not?
Yeah, it really does. And I do think that that's something that you need to kind of put in perspective when you are Washington State. Look, you're making a huge trip to the East Coast. You're trying to just have some sort of confidence win here. I mean, obviously a win for Jimmy Rogers would be huge in recruiting, and especially with the new Pac-12 coming in July in 2026, bringing in all those other new teams. If he could find a way to have an impressive victory, that would be one thing. But I think just finding yourself being respectful heading into the fourth quarter, just kind of like what you did against Washington in the Apple Cup earlier this season, would mean tons for a team like Washington State, who's trying to rebuild themselves up to being one of those powerhouses, kind of like what we saw with Mike Leach about a decade ago.
Yeah, and, it's kind of funny because watching video on Washington State, you saw a little bit of the fingerprints of what Ben Arbuckle did when he was at Washington State and all of that. And that makes you think that's the reason they're as good as they are in the pass game, because they have that little bit of a foundation. And once you mentioned that Zevi Eckhouse was there last year and started in the bowl game, that's like, okay, this is a guy that understands what's going on in the pass game concepts that they were doing previously.
Yep, 100%. Look, there's been a lot of really good quarterbacks over the last couple of years coming through Washington State system and then find themselves in really impressive Power 4 conferences. We talked John Mateer right now, Oklahoma. Cam Ward, number 1 overall draft pick, was at Washington State for a little bit of time. I'm not putting Eckhouse in that category. I don't even know if he's an NFL caliber type quarterback, but I will say I think his football IQ is just as high, if not maybe higher. It's the talent level I don't think is just there. But there's a lot of impressive things to see from this Zevi Eckhouse kid, and I think he could surprise a couple folks in Oxford this weekend.
Yeah, is he a guy that Ole Miss can just speed up, that he hasn't seen that type of thing to where he starts seeing ghosts? With him being a third-string quarterback at the beginning of this year, is it a chance that, the kind of the same thing that everybody said about Trinidad Chambliss whenever Ole Miss faced LSU? Is this just a little bit faster than his level?
I think it could be, and that wouldn't shock me if that happens. I don't know if we should put a lot of stock in saying that he's the third string quarterback and then he just kind of took over the job. Like, I think that was a mistake on the coaching staff. I think he should have been the starter throughout the entire season. If you hear it from fans and other insiders that cover Washington State, believe that Zevi Eckhouse should have been the starter, and they just went in the wrong direction because Jackson Potter just had a pretty outspoken spring camp and fall camp. So I think that as much as you want to say, well, he's the third string quarterback and that's why he might get sped up, I think that still might happen, but I wouldn't say it's because he just won the job after somebody else performing bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. And before we get to paths to victory and predictions and all that in the next segment, is this Washington State team, what will they do to try and equalize what was going on, the talent gap and all of that? Is this a team that all of a sudden will play really slow all of a sudden? Will they try surprise onside kicks and face punt? Is that part of Jimmy Rogers' kind of mindset coming into Oxford?
So far, we haven't seen too many surprises, but there also hasn't been too much games where you're in this kind of situation. I guess the only one you could compare it to would be the Apple Cup, but I think he was just so trying to get this team to play hard-nosed football and step up from the week before when they got smoked by North Texas that you didn't really get to see that shine. I think there's a completely different style here now heading into Oxford. You have a lot more confidence from this team. They know they're going against a tough opponent. They're starting a really tough East Coast trip. After this week, they got to play ranked Virginia as well next week. So it's a tough stretch for Washington State. If I had to put one thing on it, I mean, they would probably have to try their best to control the clock, just to kind of not make Ole Miss have the football longer. And then what I've seen from the last couple times where Ole Miss has won the football games, forcing Ole Miss into third and long situations would be absolutely huge. And some of those close games that you guys have had this past couple this year, 3 of them to be exact, there's only been one time where you guys been 50% or more on third down conversions. I think that would be huge if you're Washington State.
Yeah, we'll see exactly how that goes. When we come back, paths to victory for both teams, predictions of this game, and I will ask him what next year's Pac-12 will look like. So stick around for that when we get back with Christian to see what's up. Anyway, this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. From footwork to breath work to athletes that sweat all the details, Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, the impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Also, one of the tools that help make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, as formerly Open Phone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard me talk about before, just with a new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. And Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying 2 phones or relying on a landline. I love how Quo, formerly known as Open Phone, lets your team share one number and collaborate on calls and text, kind of like a shared inbox, so no customer gets left hanging. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly Open Phone. Get started free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedoncollege. That's QUO.com/lockedoncollege. And if you even have an existing number with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. So Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, so paths to victory, Christian, talking about how this game could potentially go. What is Washington State's path to beating Ole Miss?
#1 has to go to that running game. It's been so dreadful this entire season. You have to make sure that Washington State is not a one-dimensional offense. If you do, then you might as well pack it in at halftime, get yourself a nice spot, dinner reservations early, I guess lunch reservations as well, because it's going to be a really, really short game for Ole Miss and for Washington State. If the run game gets better, then I think that you can find a way to keep it close, and at least for a little bit till halftime adjustments happen, and then I can still think Ole Miss's talent takes this one away. I'll give you one more as well before I throw it back to you. I think they can't turn over the football. When you're talking the offense, the last 3 games, and most of that with Zevi Eckhouse still there, 8 turnovers over the last 3 games. Can't have that happen as against the #4 team in the country.
Yes, and a similar thing that with Ole Miss. You just have to play clean. Don't do penalties. Don't do turnovers. The only way that Ole Miss can lose this game, in my opinion, is if Ole Miss helps themselves lose this game. If Ole Miss plays even a B game, they're going to win this game pretty handily. that's not an insult towards Washington State. That's just a statement of kind of fact that with Jimmy Rogers building up a new program and what's going on. I think that's the path for Ole Miss to win, is just play clean. Do not help your enemy defeat you. Basically art of war type stuff. And I think the score prediction for this game, I'm going to go with Ole Miss 35, Washington State 17. I do not think Ole Miss covers in this game. I think it's going to look like a sloppy game. Lane Kiffin is doing way too much politicking about this game to make me think they didn't have a horrible week of bye week practice. So we'll see how it goes in this football game, but without turnovers, if you get an A game from Washington State, Ole Miss 35, Washington State 17. What say you?
Yeah, I'm really close on that. I got it just a little bit higher. I had 42-21 as my score for Ole Miss over Washington State. And I think that final touchdown for Washington State is, I consider it a garbage touchdown. I think for the most part, it's going to be 42-14 for the most of it. But I think during the first half, I think this is at most a 10-point game. I think there's going to be a really good first half from Washington State. And I think that's where you get to collect your wins if you're Jimmy Rogers. They have to find a way to increase the drives on Washington State's offense. Ole Miss has done a really good job. I don't have to tell you this. You've been paying attention to them all year long, but Ole Miss has done a great job with their methodical 10-plus play drives. They've done a really good job keeping their offense on the field, and Washington State can't let that happen. They have to have the ball just as much, if not more, than Ole Miss did if they want to find a way to control the clock and keep the score as low as possible, because I think that keeps them in the game even better.
All right, before we get out of here, explain what the Pac-12 is going to look like next year and why everybody should perk up to what's going on.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. July 2026 is when the Pac-12 reignites. I mean, it's still around, but you're finally bringing in some more teams. There will be 8 football teams, Washington State and Oregon State, the new original 2 that have been there. And then they're going to add in Texas State from the Sun Belt, and then 5 teams in from the Mountain West, in Colorado State, Utah State, Boise State, San Diego State, and I'm missing one, Fresno State. So you'll have 8
so
teams.
You have to have state to be in that conference.
It's what it sounds like, right? Yeah, it's all states, all state schools. Yeah, really funny stuff. But all of them definitely hit the cake on that one. What will be interesting is that there will only be 8 football teams. That means there will only be 7 conference games for the first year while they wait to most likely add some new members in the near future. But that means there's 5 non-conference games. So we'll see who adds those, if they're the SEC or some of the other power conferences, or if they'll find a partnership with another G5 conference. But overall, some exciting stuff. And I think it's nice just to have that brand back, a true Pac-12 brand back into college football. And Pac-12 After Dark is definitely a fun primetime spot.
All right. Tell everybody how to watch your stuff with Pac-12 Daily and all of that good stuff, man.
Yeah, you can find it at pac12daily.com, or you can find it on YouTube at Pac-12 Daily. We drop stuff about all the teams, not just Oregon State and Washington State right now. We're talking about all the new Pac-12 with July 2026 coming very soon. I didn't want to wait around, so we dropped the brand new Pac-12 Daily. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts as well.
All right, Christian Rao, Pac-12 Daily, thank you very much for coming by, and we'll talk to you later, buddy.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
All right. Christian Rao, thanks to him very much, and thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we are the front door of Ole Miss. If you don't believe me, Google Ole Miss Podcast and see how much we come up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It helps the show, and it's completely free. Your support means the world to us. It's another big moment on Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV are presenting College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside 2-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and, of course, Locked On's panel of local experts, a college football preview show that only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. Hotty toddy, and remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.